I find myself thinking about a spring morning when cherry blossom petals danced in the air, a sight so beautiful, so ephemeral. It was on such a morning that security cameras captured something truly miraculous, something technology alone could never explain. It was proof, I believe, that love knows no boundaries, that memory is incredibly powerful, and that even a goodbye can be an experience of profound purity. It all began with a white gorilla and an elderly woman in a wheelchair. This gorilla, Kesi, unlocked a lock that had been closed for years. But how could he remember something from so long ago? How could he be so gentle, despite his immense strength? And how could he form such a deep connection with a human? The answers, I discovered, lie in the story of a bond that science struggles to fully comprehend. It's a story that begins with Emma Carter, a woman who dedicated 42 years to working with primates. But nothing in her life was as transformative as the night she raided a laboratory. That night in 2006, everything changed for her, and for a 5-month-old white baby gorilla. Genetic engineering was advancing rapidly then, and Emma, working for an animal rights organization, had been watching a suspicious laboratory for months. Finally, she managed to get inside. What she saw shook her to her core. In a small cage, in the middle of a cold, sterile room, lay a gorilla infant with fur as white as snow. Unlike the other gorillas in the surrounding cages, this infant seemed to defy nature. When Emma examined the files, she learned the truth. This was one of the first genetically modified gorilla infants. Not an albino, but the result of deliberate genetic intervention. Scientists had tampered with its genes, intending to display it as a rare species, perhaps even to sell it to wealthy collectors. The tiny creature lived without a mother, without love, existing only as an experimental object. Something broke within Emma's heart. She made a decision. She couldn't leave this infant behind. Risking her career, her freedom, and perhaps even her life, she took Kesi. She named him Kesi, meaning hope in an ancient language. He was proof that humanity could still do good, that love was stronger than science. The first days were difficult. Kesi was traumatized. He cried through the nights, trembling in Emma's arms. But Emma didn't give up. She fed him, sang him lullabies, and slowly gained his trust. As months passed, their bond deepened. As Kesi grew, his white fur seemed to shine even brighter. His intelligence, his empathy, and his loving gaze amazed everyone. It was as if he was now receiving back all the love he had lost in that laboratory cell, multiplied. By the time he turned 3, Kesi was too big to climb on Emma's shoulder. Yet, he still came to her side every morning, resting his huge head on her knees, waiting for her hands to wander through his fur. This ritual was sacred for Emma, a time for a silent conversation they both shared. Emma taught Kesi simple things: how to peel fruit, how to play games, and even how to open a simple lock. She showed him this last skill as a fun activity, turning small buttons in the right sequence. Kesi thought it was a game, but it was one of the most important gifts Emma gave him: the ability to understand the idea of freedom. Years passed. When Kesi turned 10, he weighed over 200 kilograms. His white fur seemed to glow in the sunlight, and his amber eyes held deep wisdom. Emma could no longer keep him at home. It would be dangerous and wrong, but the solution she found was the best for him. the local rehabilitation centre agreed to accept Kesi. It was a professional facility designed for injured animals in need of protection, with large areas where Kesi would be safe, cared for by experts, and able to move freely. The day she took him there, Emma felt something tear inside her. Kesi looked at her, and there was an understanding in his big eyes, as if he knew that Emma thought this was best for him. As she left him, Emma stroked his head one last time, whispered in his ear, "I will always love you, Kesi. You're my son." And Kesi touched Emma's face one last time, those giant fingers touching hers as if making a promise that he would never forget her. After that day, Emma visited him every week. They stopped just before the bars. Kesi had his back turned, sitting on a large rock. Emma wanted to call him, but words no longer came, only rasping sounds. Tears streamed from her eyes. Being so close and having to turn back without seeing him was unbearable. Sarah touched her shoulder. "Let me call him," she said softly. But at that moment, as if a miracle was happening, Kesi turned his head. Maybe he felt the vibration of the sound, or maybe his instincts whispered something to him. When that huge head turned, his amber eyes locked onto Emma. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. At that moment, all the noise in the world ceased. There was only the woman and the gorilla. Mother and son, two souls reunited after years. Kesi slowly stood up. His massive body of 210 kilo gained a strange grace. As he walked toward the bars, there was purpose in every step. He was coming to Emma. He had seen her, and he remembered her. When he reached the bars, he stopped. His hands gripped the metal, his head bowed, his eyes still on Emma. Then he made a sound, deep, human-like, as if he was in pain. It was one of those characteristic sounds gorillas make when they're sad. Sarah brought the chair even closer. Now there was only a meter between Kesi and her. The bars were the only obstacle. Emma tried to reach out to him with her trembling hand, but she didn't have the strength. When Kesi understood this, he extended his own giant hand through the bars. His fingers touched Emma's. That touch was like electricity. 10 years. She hadn't been able to fully touch him for 10 years, and now those giant fingers were intertwined with hers. Warm, soft, familiar. Kesi's fingers began to tremble. Was he crying? Could gorillas cry? I don't know. But at that moment, she knew they were both feeling the same pain. A word fell from her mouth. Kai. That huge head bowed even further, leaning against the bars as if trying to hug Emma. And right at that moment, something strange happened. Kesi pulled his hand back, turned his head slightly to the side, examined the lock on the edge of the bars, and then he took action. That simple lock mechanism Emma had taught him as a game years ago. 3 buttons, when turned in a specific sequence, would open it. This was a simple but effective system designed to prevent visitors from accidentally opening the door. But Kesi remembered it. He turned the first button right, the second button left, and the third button right. A click sound was heard. The lock had opened. Sarah's breath caught. "Oh my God," she whispered. When the center security guards noticed the situation from the monitors, they panicked. The alarm began to sound, but Emma wasn't afraid, because she was looking into Kesi's eyes, and there was no danger there, only love. Kesi slowly pushed the door. The metal bars creaked open, and that giant gorilla, for the first time in 10 years, stepped outside freely. Security teams came running, tranquilizer darts in their hands, some with guns. "Get back!" someone shouted. "The animal has gotten loose." But Kesi didn't even look at them. He only looked at Emma, and with slow steps, as carefully as if approaching something breakable, he moved toward her. Sarah had frozen behind the chair. She couldn't move, but Emma tried to give her a signal with her hand. "Let," she said, with difficulty. Sarah hadn't understood. "What?" "Let him." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. She didn't want to leave her sister here alone with this giant animal. But when she saw that determination in Emma's eyes, she slowly backed away. One of the security team members shouted, "No, get away from there. This is very dangerous." I've read stories about animal behavior, about instinct and learned response. But what I witnessed that day went beyond anything I could have imagined. It was a meeting of two souls, a farewell between mother and son after years apart. Sarah, ever watchful, told everyone to stop, to just wait. Kesi was now face to face with Emma, his shadow falling over her. The sunlight seemed to halo his white fur as he slowly crouched down, bringing himself to her level. He extended a hand, his massive fingers touching her face with unbelievable gentleness, like he was caressing a child. He plucked a cherry blossom petal from her hair, studied it, and carefully placed it on the ground before resting his great head on Emma's knees. Everyone froze. Security, visitors, staff. Every breath seemed held, because this wasn't just an animal's behavior. Emma raised a trembling hand and touched Kesi's head, feeling the warm, soft, familiar fur between her fingers. Tears streamed down her face, but they were no longer tears of pain, only gratitude and thankfulness. Kesi made a soft, almost human sound, a whimpering gorillas make only in the deepest emotional moments, as if saying, "Mom, you're here. I missed you. I never forgot you." Words, difficult and choppy, fell from Emma's lips, coming from her heart. "I love you, Kesi." He lifted his head slightly and looked at her. There were no tears in his amber eyes, but there was something else. Understanding, acceptance, as if he knew she wouldn't be with him much longer. His large hand reached for the wheelchair armrest, carefully examining the metal edge. Then he placed his hand on hers. Their hands met under the falling cherry blossoms. Emma realized then that Kesi was being so careful, controlling every movement, because he knew she was fragile and he wanted to protect her. Minutes drifted by. No one interfered. The security teams lowered their weapons, recognizing love, not a threat. Dr. Alan Thompson, the center's director, stepped forward. His eyes welled up behind his glasses. He'd worked with animals for years, but he had never witnessed such a bond. "The most extraordinary thing I've ever witnessed," he said, his voice trembling. "This is something even science can't explain." Sarah was crying, and other visitors silently shed tears, everyone understanding that this was more than just a woman and a gorilla. It was a universal bond, a mother's love for her child, a love that transcended species, time, and distance. Kesi slowly lifted his head, looked at Emma one last time, and then he brought his hand to her face, wiping the tears from her eyes with his finger. A compassionate, protective gesture full of love. Emma wanted to say one last thing, but words seemed inadequate. Kesi understood. He knew everything she wanted to tell him. "You are my son," she said, with her last bit of strength. Kesi rested his head on her knees again and stayed there. There was a shared understanding between them. This wasn't goodbye, but a moment of gratitude for the most beautiful gift life had given them. Cherry blossoms continued to fall around them, pink petals landing on white fur, the sun reflecting off the wheelchair. Everything felt perfect. As the sun climbed higher, Kesi remained by Emma's side, unwilling to leave. Dr. Thompson approached slowly, holding a basket of Kesi's favourite fruits. "Kesi," he said softly, "come on, buddy. Let Emma rest." Kesi looked at the doctor, then back at Emma, hesitation in his eyes, as if he knew that leaving meant never seeing her again. Perhaps he was right. Gathering her strength, Emma gently pushed him away. "Go," she whispered. When they got home, Sarah made tea for Emma, but she couldn't drink it. She felt empty inside, as if a part of her had stayed there with Kesi. That night, Emma lay in her bed, looked at the ceiling, and thought of the night she first saw Kesi, that tiny white infant, and how she had taken him in her arms. She had made a promise. "I will protect you. I will love you." And she had kept her promise, every day, every moment, doing what was best for Kesi. Days passed, weeks passed. Sarah brought her news of Kesi, saying he was doing well. But there was something Sarah didn't say. Kesi came to the bars every evening at sunset and looked at the last place Emma had stood. 2 months later, one morning when Emma woke up, she was having trouble breathing. The disease had progressed. Sarah called the ambulance, but Emma refused. She didn't want to go to the hospital. She wanted to be at home in peace. That night, as she lay in her bed, she looked out the window. The moon was full, and white light filtered into the room. A strange feeling overcame her, as if Kesi were beside her, as if that giant hand were touching hers again. She closed her eyes and imagined Kesi, his white fur, his amber eyes, his giant but gentle hands. She imagined that last day, that perfect day when cherry blossoms danced in the air, when the sun illuminated everything. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness. "Thank you for letting me love you, Kesi." And that night, Emma fell asleep in peace. The next morning, Sarah couldn't wake her. Emma was gone, but there was a smile on her face, a peaceful, happy expression, as if she had seen a beautiful dream. When Dr. Thompson received the news, he cried. Emma had not only saved an animal's life, she had given him a life, a loving, meaningful life. How would they tell Kesi? How do you tell a gorilla that the person he loved most has died? But Kesi already knew that morning. He hadn't come to the bars as usual. For the first time in days, he didn't break his morning routine. He just sat in the farthest corner of his area, head bowed, motionless, as if mourning. Dr. Thompson made a decision. He asked Sarah for Emma's favourite shawl, and one morning in the early hours, he left it in Kesi's area. When Kesi saw the shawl, he froze. He approached, smelled it, and at that moment, his giant body trembled. His hands grasped the shawl, brought it to his face, and smelled it for a long, long time. This was Emma's scent, lavender and daisy. Kesi had never forgotten that scent. He gently pressed the shawl to his chest, bowed his head. From that day on, Kesi slept with that shawl every night. In the morning, he would take it with him, protecting it as if it were a treasure. This was Kesi's way of maintaining his connection with Emma. Months passed. Kesi slowly returned to normal. He ate, he played, he lived. But every evening at sunset, he would take that shawl with him and come to the bars. He would sit there, wait, and perhaps, in a way, Emma was always there. In every cherry blossom petal, in every ray of sunlight, Emma was in Kesi's heart, just as Kesi was in Emma's heart. A year later, the Rehabilitation Centre erected a special monument in Emma's memory, made of white marble. It was a small but meaningful monument. On it was a figure of a woman and a gorilla hand in hand, and underneath was an Indian. Emma Carter, 1964 to 2026. She taught that love knows no language, species, or barrier. On the day of the monument's unveiling, Sarah was there, and Kesi was there too, watching silently from behind the bars. When the ceremony ended, Sarah went to Kesi's side and looked at him. Those amber eyes gave Sarah a sad but grateful look. "You loved my sister very much, didn't you?" said Sarah, with tears. Kesi bowed his head slightly, as if confirming. "She loved you very much too," said Sarah. "Know that." And Kesi at that moment made a strange sound, soft, sweet, sad, one of those rare sounds with which gorillas express their deepest feelings. Years passed. Kesi lived a long and happy life. Grey strands had appeared among his white fur, but that sparkle in his eyes never disappeared, and he carried Emma's shawl with him until he died. One autumn morning, Kesi peacefully passed away. Veterinarians said his heart had stopped, but caretakers said something else. He finally went to be with Emma. They buried Kesi right next to Emma's monument and wrote on it, "Kesi, 2006 to 2023. He knew what love was, and he never forgot it." That night, the full moon illuminated both graves. Emma and Kesi, mother and son, two souls, finally together again. And you could see cherry blossom petals dancing in the wind, even though it wasn't the season, as if Emma and Kesi were somehow still showing their love. I find myself returning to the image of them together, these figures from a distant past. It's a simple thought, really, but so much history, so much human experience can be contained in such a small detail. I often wonder about the lives they led, the world they inhabited, the stories we uncover, the fragments we piece together. They offer glimpses, whispers of what once was,